We all know someone like him, confident, charming, in control, or at least, that's what he wanted everyone to believe. But underneath the surface, he was scared. Scared of being vulnerable, scared of being wrong, scared of not being enough. So he hid behind ego. He made everything about winning, about being right, about staying one step ahead, even in love. And here's the truth, you can only play that game for so long before karma catches up. Not because karma is cruel, but because love doesn't survive where ego thrives. This is the story of a man who lost what mattered most, because he couldn't let go of the one thing that mattered leasting, his pride. And now he's left with regret. Let's talk about it. He thought being the most confident person in the room was the same as being the most secure. But confidence built on ego is just armor. It looks strong, but it's hollow. And that's what he'd mastered. From the outside, he had it all together. He knew the right things to say, how to keep the upper hand, how to charm people. Especially her. He wasn't interested in connection as much as he was in control. And the most dangerous part, he didn't even realize it. When someone truly cares for you, they try to connect with you, not your highlight reel. But he was so focused on being admired, validated, respected, even feared, that he never allowed himself to be truly seen. Vulnerability felt like a threat. So instead of opening up to her, he stayed in the role of the one who had it all figured out. He confused attention with intimacy. He thought if he could keep her wanting more, if he stayed a little emotionally out of reach, that he'd keep the power. And it worked for a while. The truth is, ego doesn't form relationships. It performs in them. It keeps you at a distance. It makes every conversation a negotiation. Every conflict becomes a chance to win rather than understand. And that's exactly what started to happen. When she expressed how she felt, he dismissed it. When she needed reassurance, he made her feel like she was asking for too much. He saw her emotions as a problem to be solved, or worse, an inconvenience. But she wasn't trying to be difficult. She was trying to connect. She wanted to feel close. And every time he pulled away, she didn't just feel rejected. She felt alone in a relationship where she was supposed to be safe. He thought emotional distance was strength. He didn't realize it was slowly becoming the very thing that was pushing her away. But here's the kicker, ego is blind to damage until it's too late. Because as long as you feel in control, you don't see what's crumbling underneath. He thought he was setting the rules, but she was already playing a different game. She was slowly detaching, withdrawing, losing trust. Not in him, but in the idea that he could ever meet her emotionally. And by the time he noticed her pulling away, she was already halfway out the door. He never meant to hurt her, but he hurt her just the same. Not with cruelty, but with absence. Not with betrayal, but with coldness. And when she finally walked away, he didn't get it. At first, he blamed her, told himself she was too sensitive, that she overreacted. But in the quiet that followed, when the text stopped, when the nights felt heavier, something began to sink in. She hadn't wanted him to be perfect. She just wanted him to be real. And he couldn't give her that, because he hadn't given it to himself. Now he looks back and sees it clearly. All the times he had the chance to lean in but pulled away. All the opportunities to show love but chose pride. He wasn't chasing connection. He was chasing validation. He didn't want to love. He wanted to be admired. And that difference cost him everything. He thought he was protecting himself from pain, but all he did was delay it. Now, the pain he feels is the pain of knowing he had someone who saw him, who believed in him, who tried to love him. And he kept her at arm's length because it made him feel safe. He believed she would always be there. It wasn't arrogance in the obvious sense. It was quiet, unspoken entitlement. Somewhere deep down, he assumed her love was a constant, like the sun rising or the tide returning. She had shown up for him again and again. She forgave when he withdrew, waited when he wasn't ready, and tried to understand even when he didn't explain. Over time, he mistook her consistency for permanence. He thought she wasn't going anywhere, no matter what. At first, she gave without asking much in return. Not because she didn't value herself, but because she believed in the version of him he could be. She saw the good in him. The kindness in moments when he let his guard down, the softness beneath the surface. So she stayed, even when it was hard, even when he gave her less than what she needed. And instead of meeting her halfway, he started to expect it. She became his emotional safety net. He knew, consciously or not, that she loved him enough to stay, even when he wasn't showing up the way she deserved. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't make someone immune to exhaustion. She wasn't made of stone. Her patience wasn't infinite. Each time he brushed off her feelings, it left a mark. Each time he didn't show up in a moment she needed him, something chipped away. And the saddest part, he didn't notice. He assumed that because she wasn't yelling, because she wasn't threatening to leave, because she kept loving him, everything was fine. But silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the sound of someone slowly giving up. He never said thank you. Not really. He didn't recognize the emotional labor she carried, the times she comforted herself because he wasn't emotionally available, the times she held space for him but went unnoticed when she was quietly unraveling. He thought love was about grand gestures or staying together through the storm. But sometimes, love is in the little things. The everyday choice to be emotionally present, to ask how she's doing and actually listen, to meet her halfway without her always having to lead. Eventually, she stopped asking for more, not because she didn't need it, but because she knew she wouldn't get it. And when someone stops asking, that's when the relationship starts to die. She still smiled, still gave what she could, but her heart was no longer open in the same way. She was protecting herself. She had finally realized that the love she was giving wasn't being returned with the same care. And the moment she stopped believing that he would ever truly show up, everything shifted. When she left, he was shocked, genuinely confused. Why now? He thought. We were fine. But they weren't. He had just grown comfortable. He thought love meant never having to worry, that once someone loves you, they always will, no matter how little effort you give. But love isn't a guarantee. It's a living, breathing thing. It needs nurturing, attention, respect. And without those things, it fades, even if it once felt unbreakable. Only then did he begin to realize what he'd lost. Not just the relationship, but the depth of connection he'd taken for granted. The woman who had loved him when he barely knew how to love himself. The one who stayed long after she should have walked away. And now, the silence she left behind echoes louder than any words she ever said. He used to think karma was some mystical punishment handed out by the universe to people who did terrible things. The kind of thing you see play out in stories, not in real life. In his mind, he wasn't a bad person, just guarded, focused, not always available. He convinced himself that his behavior wasn't cruel, it was just how he was wired. He didn't cheat, didn't lie, didn't scream. But what he didn't understand was that karma doesn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it whispers, it creeps in slowly, and sometimes it shows up not as some big disaster, but as the consequences of what you repeatedly chose to ignore. When he lost her, it didn't feel like karma at first. It just felt like confusion, then anger, then emptiness. But as time passed, he started to feel something more painful than all of that, clarity. He began replaying moments he once brushed off. The time she told him she felt unseen. The way her voice would soften when she was trying to explain something vulnerable, and how quickly he'd shut it down or change the subject. The way she used to light up around him, and how that light had slowly dimmed. He remembered the nights she lay beside him, but felt miles away, and how he never asked why. Back then, it didn't feel like much. Now, it all landed differently. Now, it hurt. Because karma, in its truest form, isn't about payback. It's about reflection. It's about being confronted with the mirror you've spent years avoiding. The punishment isn't external, it's internal. It's when you finally see the cost of your actions, not on the world around you, but on the people you cared about, and what that cost has now taken from you. For him, karma looked like waking up to the weight of emotional damage he never intended to cause, but did anyway. Not through explosions, but through neglect, through avoidance, through self-protection masquerading as strength. He used to think emotional detachment was maturity, that not reacting made him composed, but now he sees it differently. His calm wasn't peace, it was distance, it was disconnection. He thought keeping things surface level made him safe, but all it did was starve the relationship of oxygen until it suffocated. He realizes now that karma didn't come for him in dramatic fashion. It came in the form of watching someone walk away, not because they stopped loving him, but because they finally had to start loving themselves. And that's the bitter part. She didn't slam the door. She didn't wish him harm. She simply let go. She had been fighting alone for too long, and when she finally chose herself, he was left alone with all the things he never said and never did. That's when karma became real, not because she wanted revenge, but because she found peace. And in doing so, she left him behind, trapped in the same emotional cage he thought was keeping him safe. Now, his regret is his mirror, his memories are the karma, and the voice in his head doesn't shout. It reminds. Every time he sees a version of her in someone else, every time he hears a song they once shared, every time he sees another man do what he never could, he's reminded. Karma didn't need to punish him. His own awareness of what he lost was enough. She saw him in a way no one else did. Not the version he put on display for the world, not the one he used to impress or protect himself, but the real him, the one with fears he didn't talk about, dreams he barely admitted to himself, and wounds he didn't know how to heal. She didn't love the mask, she loved the man behind it. And that terrified him, because being seen that clearly, that intimately, felt too raw, too vulnerable. So instead of leaning into it, he pulled away, not all at once, just enough to keep a safe distance. He thought he had time. He believed she would always be there, patiently waiting for the day he was finally ready to open up. And maybe she would have been, if he had shown any willingness to meet her halfway. But he didn't. He chose control over connection. He chose to be emotionally invincible rather than emotionally available. And every time she reached out to him, tried to get closer, he found subtle ways to deflect, to diminish, to protect his pride. To him it felt like strength. To her, it felt like being kept out of a place she desperately wanted to be, his heart. What he didn't realize at the time was that there's a kind of pain that comes from being next to someone and still feeling alone. That's what she was carrying. She gave and gave, not because she was weak, but because she believed in him. She believed that underneath the wall he'd built, there was someone worth fighting for. And she was right. But belief alone can't sustain a relationship. At some point, love needs to be reciprocated in a way that's felt, not just assumed. And he didn't give her that. He thought she'd never leave because of how deeply she cared. What he didn't understand is that the deeper someone cares, the more it hurts when they're taken for granted. She didn't walk away out of anger. She walked away because holding on had become a form of self-betrayal. She wasn't leaving him, she was returning to herself. When it finally hit him, it wasn't during some dramatic moment. It was quiet. It was in the silence of her absence, in the stillness where her laughter used to be, in the empty space next to him where her energy used to live. That's when he realized she wasn't just someone who loved him. She was someone who understood him, someone who had seen his darkness and chosen to stay anyway, someone who had offered him a kind of love that required no performance. And he let her go, not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know how to let her love him. Now he's haunted by the simplicity of what she wanted: truth, softness, vulnerability, not perfection, not status, just realness. And now that he's finally ready to offer it, she's no longer there. That's the cruel irony. The very strength he thought he was showing by holding back is what ultimately proved he wasn't strong enough to let her in. And that's the pain he has to live with, not just losing her, but knowing he lost the one person who truly saw him, the one who was willing to stand beside him in his mess. If only he'd let her. She wasn't asking him to be someone else. She was asking him to be himself. And now, without her, he's finally meeting the man she believed in all along. But it's too late for her to see him now. Regret is a strange kind of pain. It doesn't scream like heartbreak or burn like betrayal. It's quiet, persistent, something you carry in the background of your life, often triggered by the smallest things. A place you used to go together, a phrase she used to say, a song you didn't even like until it reminded you of her. That's where he found himself, surrounded by memories he didn't know he was making at the time, now weighted with the truth of what he lost. At first, he told himself what most people do: she'll come back. She just needs space. It wasn't that bad. But time has a way of stripping away your defenses, and slowly, he began to see the truth. She didn't need space. She needed someone who would show up, be present, and care enough to grow alongside her. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she realized she couldn't keep loving someone who refused to meet her at the level she was ready for. That's when the regret started to shift. It wasn't just about missing her anymore. It became about the why. Why did he shut her out? Why did he ignore the signs? Why couldn't he say what he felt when it mattered most? That's when regret stopped being just a wound and started becoming a lesson, a mirror, something that forced him to confront not just what he did, but who he was in the relationship. He began to realize that he hadn't just lost her. He had never really let her in. He had been so caught up in managing his image, staying in control, keeping his emotions in check, that he forgot love isn't a performance. It's not about doing just enough to keep someone around. It's about vulnerability. It's about being honest even when it's messy, uncomfortable, or uncertain. And he hadn't done any of that. The hardest part of regret isn't the memory, it's the clarity. When you finally see what someone was trying to give you. When you recognize how hard they were fighting to stay connected while you were busy holding back. When you realize the late night conversations she tried to start weren't complaints. They were cries for closeness. When her frustration wasn't nagging, it was her last attempt to reach a part of you that you had buried too deep. Now he gets it. Not just emotionally, but physically. He feels it in the pit of his stomach. He hears her voice in moments of silence. He sees her face in the crowd and knows it's not her, but wishes for a second that it was. That somehow she'd turn around, walk back, and say, "I still believe in us." But she won't. She already did that more times than she should have. The only thing left now is what he chooses to do with the regret. That's the crossroads. Because regret can either turn into shame and stagnation, or it can fuel change. The difference is in whether he's willing to truly face himself, to ask hard questions, to stop blaming timing or her expectations or emotional immaturity, and start owning his choices. Growth doesn't come from moving on quickly. It comes from sitting with the discomfort long enough to understand it. He can't go back and undo the silence, the missed moments, the ways he made her feel like she was asking for too much. But he can decide that he'll never be that man again. That the next time love shows up, he'll recognize it before it walks away. That he won't wait for loss to teach him how to show up, because regret is only wasted if it doesn't lead to growth. He spent most of his life believing that strength meant control. Control over his emotions, over situations, over how people saw him. He prided himself on being composed, unshakable, unraidable. Vulnerability in his mind was weakness, something to be avoided, something that made people lose respect. So he built walls, smooth, high, impenetrable, and behind them he felt safe. He thought staying guarded made him powerful, untouchable, immune to pain. But what he didn't see is that the same walls that protected him also kept love out. When he met her, she brought something different, something gentle, open, unafraid to feel deeply. She didn't need to be the strongest person in the room. She didn't care about winning arguments or being in control. She just wanted to be real, to connect, to love fully and be loved in return. At first, that scared him. Then it frustrated him. He didn't know how to meet her there. Her emotional openness felt unfamiliar, even threatening. So he defaulted to what he knew, staying emotionally distant, withholding affection, never letting her too close. He thought that was keeping him safe. He thought it made him strong. But she didn't want the version of him that was always fine, always in control, always deflecting. She wanted the version of him that felt things, the one that got scared sometimes, the one that had doubts, insecurities, questions, because that's the version of him that was real, and realness is what love needs, not perfection, not invincibility, just honesty. The truth is, there's nothing strong about emotional avoidance. It's not bravery, it's fear in disguise. And he was afraid to be seen too clearly, afraid to admit he didn't always have the answers, afraid that if he opened up, he might be rejected or misunderstood. But in trying to avoid that pain, he created a deeper one, because the woman who stood in front of him wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for truth, for connection. And he couldn't give it to her, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't yet know how to let go of the armor. Now, after everything has fallen apart, he understands. He sees that the power he clung to wasn't power at all. It was fear wrapped in pride. And the moments he thought he was protecting himself, he was actually pushing her away. Every time he held back an "I miss you," every time he avoided the hard conversations, every time he acted like her feelings were too much, he was choosing ego over intimacy. And it cost him the very thing he wanted most: real love. Strength isn't in how much you can hold in. It's in how brave you are to let it out. To say, "I'm struggling," or "I need you," or "I'm scared to lose you." That kind of emotional courage takes far more strength than pretending nothing bothers you. But he didn't learn that in time. He thought being the rock meant never cracking. Now he sees it differently. The strongest love comes from those willing to break open, not to fall apart, but to let someone in. She would have stayed if he had let her see him, not the polished version, but the real one. And now he's left with the weight of knowing that the very thing he was most afraid to give was the only thing she ever truly wanted: vulnerability, truth, presence. Not a performance of strength, but the quiet confidence of a man who's unafraid to feel. A man who knows that real power is not in control, but in connection. So what do you do when karma humbles you, when regret becomes your teacher, and the person you lost was the one who truly saw you? You stop running, you stop pretending that ego is strength, and you start listening to the version of you that you buried under pride, fear, and control. Because here's the truth: love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. It asks for courage, not the kind that keeps your guard up, but the kind that lets it down. And if you're lucky enough to get another chance, not just with someone else, but with yourself, you take it. Fully, bravely. Honestly, don't wait for loss to teach you how to love. Let this be the moment you decide ego won't drive anymore. Next time you show up, real, imperfect, and all in. That's how love lasts. That's how healing begins. And that's the kind of man she believed you could be all along.